Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that might just make you question everything you thought you knew about love.
And meaning.
Yeah, especially in those intense, can't live without them kind of relationships.
Yeah, those really, really deep ones that we all wonder about.
Exactly.
So what we're going to be uncovering today is how self-deception plays a surprising role in all of this. We're going to be using excerpts from a book about the self-deceiving brain.
Okay.
And trust me, it gets pretty wild as we journey through evolution, psychology,
Wow.
and even a real-life story that'll leave you thinking, wait, what?
Yeah, get ready to have some of your assumptions challenged because they're going to be tackling some seriously thought-provoking questions.
Oh, yeah.
Like, is love just a biological trick our genes play on us? Could our brains actually be hardwired for delusion? And maybe the most mind-bending question of all is seeing the world with perfect accuracy always a good thing?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and we're going to be exploring all of that today.
I'm excited.
By the end of this deep dive, I think you'll have a whole new perspective on yourself, your relationships, and the choices we all make every day.
All right, so let's start with this idea that evolution might be playing tricks on us with self-deception.
Right.
I mean, isn't evolution supposed to make us better, more adapted to reality?
You would think so, right?
Yeah. Why would it build in these bugs that make us see things differently than they actually are?
Yeah, that's the thing. Natural selection, it doesn't actually prioritize truth. It's all about survival.
Okay.
And passing on our genes, right?
Right.
And sometimes those distortions, those shortcuts, those little self-deceptions actually give us an advantage.
Interesting.
It's kind of sneaky, but it works.
Okay. The book uses this really cool analogy about designing self-replicating robots for a faraway planet.
Right.
And it argues that if we wanted those robots to survive, we wouldn't program them to just be these cold, calculating machines.
Exactly. It wouldn't make sense.
Right. We'd have to equip them with something that resembles emotions.
Right.
Things like fear, to keep them away from danger.
Yeah, to help them survive.
And maybe even a sense of love to motivate them to protect their offspring and keep their lineage going.
Exactly. Keep those robots going.
Right. Even if those emotions led them to make irrational decisions sometimes.
Oh, yeah, it would happen.
Their survival as a species would be more likely.
Right. Because that emotion would drive them.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Okay.
So you're saying our emotions, even something as powerful as love, might be less about some grand romantic ideal.
Right.
And more about ensuring our genes survive.
That's the idea.
Wow.
It might sound a little humbling at first.
Yeah.
But it also explains why love can be so overwhelming.
Right.
So irrational.
It's not just us being crazy in love.
Exactly.
It could be millions of years of evolution whispering in our ear. Like protect, connect, reproduce.
That's it. That's the drive.
But wait a minute. If love is so primal, so deeply rooted in our biology, why does it sometimes feel like it just throws logic and reason completely out the window?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
We've all made questionable choices in the name of love.
Of course, we all have.
Hey.
And it's important to remember love doesn't operate in a vacuum. You know?
Right.
It's mixed up with all sorts of things, cultural norms and all our experiences, other emotions.
Yeah.
It's complicated and messy.
Right.
And there are actually neurological conditions that can stop someone from feeling love altogether.
Really?
Yeah. So it shows how much it's connected to our brain chemistry.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, the book also talks about how love serves our genes' interests at different stages of life.
Oh, yeah. It changes.
Right. So like how parental love is all about protection, tribal love is about belonging,
right,
and then romantic love kicks in for mating and child rearing.
Exactly. It adapts for what we need at the time.
Okay, so we're starting to see how self-deception might be woven into the fabric of our evolution.
Yeah, I think so.
Even when it comes to love.
Right.
But the book also asks this really intriguing question.
Okay.
Is truth always the best thing for us?
That's a deep one.
Right.
And is there actually a downside to seeing the world perfectly clearly?
Oh, wow.
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
We like to think we're rational and objective.
Yeah.
But we're often blinded by our own biases and assumptions.
Yeah, sure.
The book calls this naive realism.
Naive realism.
Yeah, basically it means we tend to think our view of reality is the correct one.
Right.
And we judge others who see things differently.
Okay, I see that. Yeah.
So like, for example,
yeah,
the book uses this wild story about a man named Andre Ganciar.
Okay.
And his cat, O.
Oh.
This is a story that's going to make you go, huh.
Okay, yeah.
So this guy,
he
spends a whopping $16,000.
Wow.
on a kidney transplant for his aging cat.
$16,000 for a cat.
That's right.
Wow.
And the reactions to this story are all over the place.
I bet.
Some people are amused, others like, what a waste,
Yeah.
and some are just outraged.
I can see it.
But that's naive realism.
Hmm.
We judge based on our own worldview
Right.
and don't try to understand his bond with Oki.
His unique perspective.
Exactly.
That's interesting that a story like that could trigger such a strong reaction.
Yeah, it is, right.
And then the book contrasts this with another story. It's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
It's about this guy who runs a fake love letter scheme through something called, like, the Church of Love.
I've heard of those.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And that contrast is key.
Exactly. It's not about saying the cat guy was right or the love letter scheme was justified.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that what's deeply true for someone else might seem absurd to us. It's a good reminder to check our assumptions before we judge.
Okay, so judging these situations just based on our definition of truth might be missing the point. It's not about condoning bad behavior. That's about recognizing that everybody has different motivations.
Right, different perspectives.
And there are multiple perspectives on every situation.
There are.
We need to ask ourselves what led these people to make these choices.
Right, what were they thinking?
What were their experiences?
That's where empathy comes in.
Yeah.
Seeing beyond our own limited viewpoints.
Okay, I'm starting to see how naive realism can distort things.
Yeah.
Especially when we're judging other people.
Right.
But how does all this tie back to self-deception?
Good question.
Is there a connection there?
There is, and it takes us to depressive realism.
Depressive realism.
It might sound weird.
Okay.
But research has shown that people with depression are actually often more accurate in judging their control over events than people who aren't depressed.
That is interesting.
Isn't it?
So you're saying that a clearer view of reality might not actually always be a good thing?
Well, at least from a mental health perspective.
Does that mean that a little self-deception could be beneficial?
That's what some researchers think.
Wow, okay.
A researcher named Shelley Taylor.
Okay.
She started exploring this.
Okay.
And she came up with positive illusions.
Positive illusions.
Yeah, they're kind of like slightly unrealistic but beneficial self-deceptions.
Okay.
That actually contribute to our well-being.
Interesting. So like thinking we're a bit smarter or luckier than we actually are.
It might sound strange.
It does.
But these positive illusions can have some really good benefits. Taylor found a link between these illusions and better coping mechanisms.
Oh, okay.
Higher motivation.
Wow.
And even potentially a longer life.
Hold on. Are you saying a little delusion could help us live longer?
It's possible.
Now, this is getting interesting.
Of course, we're not talking about living in a fantasy world, but just having a slightly inflated view of ourselves can help us get through tough times.
Okay.
Bounce back from setbacks, keep reaching for our goals.
That makes sense.
Think about it.
Okay.
If you didn't believe you could succeed,
yeah,
would you even try?
Good point.
Right.
I guess so.
But there's a flip side.
Of course.
There are times when positive illusions can backfire.
When does that line between helpful self-belief and harmful delusion get crossed?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The book gives this example of Kickstarter entrepreneurs.
Okay.
On average, men ask for a lot more money than women on Kickstarter, which you could say is like delusional overconfidence.
Right.
And you know what?
What?
They fail more often.
Oh.
But their persistence as a group, their refusal to let reality hold them back,
right,
actually leads to more success overall.
Wow, that's a fascinating paradox.
It is.
Self-deception can be both good and bad.
Exactly. It all depends.
Depending on the context.
Yeah.
That Kickstarter example makes me think about my own tendencies to underestimate risk or overestimate my abilities.
We all do it.
It's a fine line between confidence and delusion.
It is.
I guess it comes down to finding that sweet spot where self-belief is empowering,
right,
but it doesn't lead us to denial.
Exactly.
And that's what we're going to explore more in this part of our deep dive.
We'll look at examples of how self-deception plays out in relationships.
With parents, children, romantic partners.
All of them.
Even our pets.
Get ready for some surprises.
I'm ready.
It's going to be fun.
I can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of self-deception. Last time we were talking about how our brains are wired for survival, not necessarily for truth.
Right.
And how that can lead to some pretty interesting behaviors, especially when it comes to love.
And those fascinating behaviors become even more apparent when we zoom in on the role of self-deception in our most intimate relationships.
Okay.
The bonds we form with parents, children, romantic partners.
Oh, yeah, all the important ones.
Even our pets.
Yeah, the book makes a really good point about how even the most loving relationships are often built on a foundation of, let's call it, creative interpretation of reality.
Yeah, a little bit of bending the truth.
We see the best in our loved ones, sometimes to a fault, right?
Absolutely. It doesn't matter if it's the bond between a parent and child, lovers, or even pet owners and their animals.
Yeah, all those close ones.
There's often a dose of self-deception involved. It's like our brains prioritize those connections, even if it means bending reality a bit.
Like, parents who think their kid is the next Mozart,
Oh, yeah.
even if they can barely hold a crayon.
That's a classic example.
Yeah.
It's not that those parents are lying to themselves.
No?
They're filtering reality through a lens of love
Okay.
and hope. They're seeing potential, possibilities.
Yeah, and isn't there an evolutionary advantage to that?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you'd want to believe your child was amazing if you're a parent.
For sure.
Yeah.
That belief, even if it's exaggerated, can fuel a parent's dedication, their willingness to support their child, even when it's tough. It's hope.
It keeps them going. Okay, and it's not just parents. Lovers do it too, right?
Well, it's time.
Remember those first days of a relationship?
The honeymoon phase.
Everything's perfect, your partner's flawless, and you're just floating on a cloud.
Pure bliss. It's a prime example of how our brains can just ignore reality for a bit, Let us enjoy that new love.
And I'm guessing there's an evolutionary reason for that too.
You bet.
If we were constantly nitpicking, would we ever actually get together?
I doubt it. Those rose-colored glasses serve a purpose.
What do you mean?
They bond us together.
Okay.
It's that initial spark that helps us overcome our fears, actually form a connection.
Right. But we all know the honeymoon phase can't last forever.
Sadly, no.
Reality sets in, and those little quirks we found endearing, well, maybe not so much anymore.
And that's when the real work begins.
What do you mean?
Navigating those differences, accepting flaws, and finding ways to stay connected.
Even when it's not so exciting anymore.
Even then.
So how do we do that? Make that transition to a more, let's say, realistic kind of love?
Well, it's not about ignoring problems.
Okay.
It's about choosing to focus on the good stuff.
Right, the things that made you fall in love in the first place.
Exactly. Nurturing that connection.
So it's like a balancing act.
I think so. Acknowledging reality, but also seeing the best in your partner and the relationship.
And that brings us back to those positive illusions.
It does. Remember, Shelley Taylor found that those slightly unrealistic beliefs can actually be good for us.
Okay. So in a long-term relationship, a bit of that might actually help us stay together.
Could be the glue.
Interesting. But how do we know when it's healthy and when it's not?
That's a big question. I think it comes down to honesty, being self-aware.
And probably getting an outside perspective sometimes.
Absolutely. Someone to help you see things clearly. It's also crucial to think about the consequences, if it's hurting you or someone else.
Then it's time for a reality check. Okay, so we need that balance.
We do.
Nurturing the good, but also being realistic. And, this makes me think about pets.
Oh, right.
It's a really unique kind of relationship.
It is.
Lots of self-deception there, I think.
It's true. The book talks about how our love for animals often involves some pretty extreme forms of it.
Like, remember the story about Andre Gonsier?
The one with the cat and the kidney transplant.
Yeah, $16,000.
Yeah.
Logically, it seems crazy.
It does.
But for him, it was love. He wasn't thinking about logic, just pure emotion.
And the book argues that's a very human thing, that ability to extend love beyond our own species. It's part of who we are.
But is it harmful? I mean, spending that much money treating animals like they're people.
On the one hand, it could be seen as delusional.
Right.
But on the other hand, pets are proven to be good for us. Companionship, stress reduction, all that. They give us a sense of purpose.
Okay.
So even if there's a little self-deception, the overall impact could be positive.
It's like that paradox again.
It is.
Self-deception can be both. We just have to be aware of it.
And make sure it aligns with our values,
Okay, so back to the core idea.
What's that?
Self-deception isn't good or bad.
It just is.
It's a tool we can use, but we have to use it wisely.
With awareness and compassion.
So to wrap up this part, let's go back to depressive realism.
Oh, interesting.
Why do people with depression seem to see things more accurately?
Well, let's start with what it actually is.
Okay.
It's the idea that people with depression tend to have a more accurate view of how much control they have over things.
So less positive illusion.
Exactly. More realistic, even if it's a little negative.
And they're better at predicting outcomes, even bad ones.
They are. Less likely to overestimate their abilities or anything like that.
So are the rest of us delusional then?
That's a tough one. Some researchers say depressive realism is actually healthy.
Really?
Others think it's just a symptom of depression.
So we don't know for sure.
Not really.
Yeah.
It's complicated and needs more research.
But it does challenge our ideas about happiness and reality.
It does. Maybe a rosy outlook isn't always the right one.
So should we ditch our positive illusions then? Would that make us happier?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've been talking about this really interesting idea called depressive realism.
Right, where folks with depression might actually see things more realistically.
Yeah, it makes you think about that link between happiness and always having a positive outlook.
Doesn't it? So the question is, should we all be aiming for this super accurate view, even if it's less optimistic?
Or are those positive illusions, those little self-deceptions, actually good for us?
That's what I'm wondering. We've talked about how helpful they can be. But now we're saying maybe a more realistic perspective is actually healthier.
So where's the line?
Like with most things in life, I think it comes down to balance.
Okay.
Positive illusions can be great in some situations.
Yeah.
They boost our confidence, help us deal with tough times,
Right.
and even motivate us to reach our goals.
I get that, but what happens when those illusions go too far? What does that look like?
Well, imagine someone who's in a ton of debt, but they keep spending like crazy.
Oh, no.
Convinced they'll win the lottery any day now.
Oh, I see.
Or someone who stays in a bad relationship
Yeah.
because they think their partner is going to suddenly change.
Right.
That's when positive illusions become denial, and that's not good.
Definitely not. So how do we keep those positive illusions healthy?
How do we avoid falling into denial?
Yeah. How do we know if we've got that balance right?
That's where self-awareness is so important.
Okay.
Checking in with yourself.
Yeah, okay.
Asking yourself, am I being honest about this? Am I seeing things clearly, or am I just holding on to a belief that isn't helping me anymore?
And maybe it's helpful to get an outside perspective, too.
Oh, for sure.
Talk to a friend or a therapist.
There's someone you trust.
They can help you see things differently, especially when you're stuck in your own head.
Sometimes we need that outside view.
This whole journey into self-deception has been pretty mind-blowing.
It has, hasn't it?
We've talked about so much.
Evolution.
Positive illusions and even those downsides.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away? What do you hope they'll remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that self-deception is part of being human. It's not something to be ashamed of.
Right.
Or afraid of.
It's a tool we can use to deal with life and relationships.
Exactly.
The key is to use it wisely.
With awareness.
And compassion.
Yeah. Like you said, balance is everything.
We need those positive illusions to help us.
To keep us going.
To motivate us.
And to let us dream.
But we also got to stay grounded in reality. Be honest with ourselves.
For sure.
And be ready to change course if those illusions start doing more harm than good.
That's it? That's the balance?
It's about finding that sweet spot.
Between optimism and realism.
Between hope and acceptance.
And that's a journey we all have to take for ourselves.
So as we wrap up today, we encourage you to think about your own relationship with self-deception.
Yeah.
Where do your positive illusions lie?
Are they helping you?
Or is it time for a little reality check?
And remember, a bit of self-reflection can make a big difference.
Absolutely. By understanding our own tendencies, we can use self-deception in a good way.
Yeah, to create a more fulfilling life.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the human mind.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep learning.
And keep embracing the amazing